everybody. Welcome back to SpaceOil Guitars. My name is Christopher and this is my GGBO build. So a few updates for you. I have drilled and, well, I won't say installed, but on the 12th fret I drilled these two fret markers and I filled them with pink glittery glue. That's still protruding, so it has to be sanded down. Also the headstock, I have applied some lacquer to it. It hasn't been wet sanded yet. It's just to lock the logo in place. You can see that now. Also the logo sort of lost a bit of color during the lacquering, so it's not as screaming as it was. But I don't mind that. I'm thinking I might do something with the top or the round sides of the headstock. As for the back, still just carbon fiber, unfinished obviously, because the baking process of carbon fiber leaves it very, very high gloss. But I'm thinking that this entire neck will get a coat of something. Maybe maybe epoxy or maybe lacquer. I don't think I'll go wax for this. The wax may get between the wood and the carbon fiber, making that fall off over time, and I don't want that. The frets have yet to be dressed and finished. I've just sort of almost shaped them down to size. But what I have done is started lacquering the body. Also got me a set of isotunes for when I use my power tools. They're great. The sound quality isn't hi-fi by any means, but it's more than enough for using in the garage, or well, if you're doing like me, listening to audiobooks while you create. So here is the body as of now. This is just the top. You can see it's quite glossy. This is about the third coat, I think. I'm not done with the finish yet, but I'm very happy with the color. But I don't know if you can see this, but I have some spots here in the finish where there's been like a bubble has been created and then popped, leaving a bubble-shaped indentation in the lacquer. This probably comes from me having the lacquer too hot, making the propellant gases expand too much when hitting a colder surface. So that's on me, but it's nothing that can't be fixed with wet sanding and more lacquer. I've masked off everything else. I'm just doing the top, and I've masked half of the bevel because I'm thinking the bevel I'll either leave it wood colored or white to coincide with the binding on the sides. So I'm thinking I'm just using this pink lacquer here as sort of a primer for that, so that I don't have to do too much preparatory work before lacquering. So today is basically all about doing some lacquer. I'm not going to show you my process, it's just a spray can, but my wet sanding process I can show you. I do wet in wet, meaning I'm not too concerned about runs or getting a perfect coat of lacquer every time, because after wet sanding, if you sand it between every 2 and 3 coats, If you wet sand it between every 2 and 3 coats, the application of lacquer doesn't really matter. Obviously, I have here, right following this line here, I have a section where this entire piece, I have my guitar hanging from this hook when I'm lacquering it. This entire section started to sort of want to drift down, so I have this wavy line here. That will be gone. These bubbles will be gone. I had some, it started to drip, obviously this way, from this top protrusion. That will be gone. None of that will be visible after wet sanding. So now it's just for me to level the surface every 2 or 3 coats, and then get an even spread, meaning I get lacquer all over the body, and then I let it sit for 45 minutes to an hour, then do a new coat until I get 3, and then quickly wet sand. For those of you who haven't finished a guitar with color before, it's not rocket science, but the wet sanding itself may take some getting used to. You get used to how the wet paper feels on the lacquer, and all of a sudden the resistance changes. When that happens, you've basically finished that area, and you need to move on to the next, because well, I don't know the exact science of it, but my feeling is that you've scratched the surface to where the grit, the sort of granules of the grit in the sandpaper can't go down into a fresh coat. So when you move to a new section, then no scratches have been made, so all the granules catch in the coat, and you can feel an increased resistance. I leave my sandpaper or my wet paper in water overnight with a couple of drops of like dishwashing detergent, and I'm going to place this on my table. I'm just going to have to clean up there, and I'm going to show you my wet sanding process. All right, so before I get started, I want to just clarify something, because I've been getting a lot of comments on Instagram on why I would have this light here, potentially blinding me and stopping me from seeing details I might want to see. Well, now it really comes into view, because this is, firstly, it's not blinding me. It's not that bright in real life. Secondly, it helps me to see the surface of whatever I'm working on. It helps me to see the reflection, as you can too, right? So for wet sanding, I have my little bowl here, my sanding block. I use cork sanding blocks. This holds moisture very well, so that I don't have to basically moisten it all the time. For this, I'm using, you guessed it, 1200 paper. If you've seen any of my other videos, you know that the paper that I have in this color is 8 or 1200. I use 1200 for this because I feel that it's not as invasive. So now I'm doing one section at a time. I'm doing this section now, and I can very easily see it starting to matten down, and I can feel there's quite a bit of resistance here still. I'm just going to get some more water. And what I want to do here is to get it as flat as possible. When you're wet sanding, what you want to do is get things flat. You don't want to look for shine or things being matte or anything. You want it to be flat, and you can quite easily see it being flat. And you might think that you have enough color on for the grains in the wood to disappear. But you'll find that when you're wet sanding, you'll see that those grains start to disappear. So even though you'd think that the lacquer or the paint would sort of fill those grains and make them invisible, that's not always the case. For this guitar, however, I used epoxy as grain filler, so I'm not really concerned about grains showing up. It's more the inconsistencies of my paint job. So I can feel that this is getting very little traction for my paper now. So I'm going to move up this way and using my light to keep an eye on the state of what I'm wet sanding. If you want to learn about painting, in 2000 it must have been 2004 or 5, I bought this ebook called How to Paint Your Own Guitar by a man called John Glenacki, and it has been invaluable, especially the polishing process, how much muscle you have to put into it if you're doing it by hand. It's something I really underestimated. And well, this is me. This is just a color layer. If you're very good, or at least a lot better than me at putting color on, you might not have to wet sand the color. You could go straight on to clear coat and then wet sanding the clear coat, but as I've stated, I don't really pay that much attention to my lacquering because I'm going to sand it away anyway. And I don't have a proper paint booth, and I don't have proper spraying equipment. I do everything with cans, but it's worked well for me always. So now I have this sort of lip around the neck pocket where there's been a little buildup of paint. So I'm gonna wipe a little bit so I can see where I need to concentrate my sanding. So this area needs more, and just about here. And the wavy line I talked about earlier, that's completely disappeared. It starts here now and goes this way. So theory and practice basically agree at this point. So I'm just going to sand until this lip goes away. Concentrating on a small area at a time. This area where I had that drip, that's completely vanished now. So, and after this, I'm going to add more paint and then just keep going until the surface is perfect. And don't settle for anything less than you'd want to buy, basically. I've seen, well, from what I've seen on the GGBO playlist up until now, I would assume that there are other builders who have vastly better techniques than me. So I'd consider checking out the entire GGBO catalog, because there are some great builders out there. I also want to thank anybody who's engaged with my channel, left comments, starting a dialogue, that sort of thing. Yep, that's gone. So I'm going to concentrate on the areas that I could see in my light now, which is this part, just the outer edge. If you're doing a guitar without binding, pay very close attention to these edges, because it's so quick a mistake to round the edge off, and thus tearing away paint and possibly the desired contour of the body you've built. But since I have a binding here, I'm not terribly concerned about that, because I'm going to scrape that into view anyway. I've painted over the binding, but I'm going to scrape that so that it becomes visible. Okay, that's starting to get ready for a new coat, so I'm going to stop right there. Sorry, my chair's sinking. And that's basically my wet sanding for you. It's not much to it, just takes time. Don't expect to have, unless you have professional equipment or you have a lot of experience, don't expect to be done painting a guitar in, say, a day. For me, it takes weeks, because I want to get it perfect. And also I want the lacquer to harden properly before I start sanding, because if you don't let it harden all the way through and start sanding, it will sort of crumble up and into a pile, and you'll have to sand all of that away. You cannot fix that. And that goes for clear coat as well. I would recommend leaving clear coat to harden even longer. Color, if you sort of scrape off, say if I got here, it sort of crumbled around the neck pocket. With the color, I could sand that down, respray with color, leave it, and then sort of use wet sandpaper to sort of force it into the rest of the paint job. But with clear coat, you can't do that. And if you go too far, you'll start taking color off, and then you'll have to do everything again. Also be sure to check your paper for spots. Mine is without spots at the moment. If you do get spots, that may either the one of two, either your paint isn't hard enough, or you need to change out your paper because it's starting to get sort of saturated with a little stuff you're sanding off. So now I'm moving on to a new section. Doesn't this color look great? It's a gorgeous pink. I think it'll go very well with the natural color of the wood. I still don't know what wood it is. It doesn't really matter to me. But it looks like mahogany, but doesn't smell like mahogany when you're working it. Certain woods have a very distinct smell. Walnut has a very distinct smell. At least black walnut does. Maple has a distinct smell. Well, all woods. So I don't know what it could be. I'm not an expert when it comes to different wood types. There is a place you can send samples of your wood and they'll analyze it and they'll let you know what wood it is, but can't be bothered really. So I have a spot here that I'll need to, I don't know if I can sand it down all the way, but I'll need to cover it with color. So I'm gonna do the best I can to prepare it. Also around, remember I fixed the holes around. That's a very big potential for color to sort of catch up if your repair wasn't sanded completely down. So be sure to go over that area well if you have some of the issues I had, tearing and stuff. So now the body is mostly flat, and my main concern now are these holes, these bubble holes that my spray lacquer made. I'm sure I'll be able to fill them in. It's just a matter of how much lacquer it will take. Sorry, I'm switching between lacquer and paint, but in European definition, paint is what you put on houses, and this is lacquer. We call it spray lacquer, we don't call it spray paint. So I apologize if that is wrong in whatever part of the world you're watching from, but I'm going to continue to call it color, paint and lacquer. Let's see, I have some orange skin right here which sort of surprises me because I don't have it any other place. But when it's done, or when it's flat, you'll see it sort of starts looking like a matted down sheet of glass or something when you look at it in a light. And it's quite extraordinary how much you can accomplish just with wet sanding. I really like this process. It's one of my favorite parts of guitar building. It's the finishing process. Not the spray painting itself, but this stuff like this. It sort of fits me. I'm just gonna sand this orange peel skin away and focus on these sort of dots that I have. I'm thinking I may use a brush to make sure I get paint in there, because I fear that if I just paint over it, it'll leave sort of a void under the lacquer if I'm able to paint over it. That might just doesn't fill the gap, it just covers it. So I think I'm going to do that. And it's basically this section of the guitar that has the bubbles. Sort of the lower section, this section doesn't have that. So it's very strange. I don't think it's the wood reacting to anything, because that's been epoxied in. I also usually put a coat of clear on the body before I start, just so, well, I don't know why, it's just something I read somewhere. Put a dust coat of clear on before you start putting color on. And I just do. So I don't think it's that either. The lacquers are the same brands. So who knows? But we're going to have to try and fix it. So I'm just going to wipe it down. And then I'm going to spray some paint into the lid of the paint can and just sort of dab in these holes. And then once that's hardened, I am going to spray, I'm going to wet sand it again. And then hopefully these holes will be filled by then. So I'm going to cover my watch. Usually I'll have my air filtration system on for this. I won't now, because you won't be able to hear anything because it's very, very loud. But I'm basically just spraying into the can. That's just propellant, so I'm going to get a fresh can. For me, the way I finish, I usually use 2 or 3 coats of paint for an entire guitar, and usually that will suffice. That will be plenty, but obviously for this sort of repair stuff, you might need more. So I'm just dabbing paint into these bubbles. bubble holes. There are quite a lot of them now that I see it up close. So the whole point is to fill that cavity so we get a uniform paint job. So I'm going to do that, but I don't see the point in filming all of this because this is going to take a long time and it's tedious work. See you soon. All right, so we're back and all the little dents have been filled in. I also filled in some all of the holes and the larger grain lines. If you're able to see them, maybe you are, maybe you aren't. But if you are, you'll notice they're a different shade of pink. And the only reason for that is that they are shiny, whereas the main portion of the body is sanded, flat. So, and be aware that you may have to do this in like several rounds. It's not always that you get all the little dents and stuff in the first go, or the holes. So what I'm basically looking for now is to smooth out those parts that we filled in, and it takes longer than you'd think, because when you just drop lacquer on like that, it sort of goes on pretty thick, a lot thicker than it would if you sprayed it. So just take your time with this. Also make sure that it's hardened enough. This has been hardening all day, so I would say 12 to 14 hours. And I can already see that I'm going to have to do some of these bubble indentations more than once, because they filled in but they're still visible. So that means that they're not completely filled in. So there's still a little indentation there. So I'm going to do that now. And then that'll probably be it for this episode. I just want to show you one thing about the neck that I did. I wasn't really happy with the look of these fret markers that I made. I originally filled them in just with sparkling glue. So I drilled a hole inside the markings and filled it with black super glue. So now, I don't know if it's visible. It's barely visible to the naked eye, but it's, if I can get the light right, no. It's basically a black fret marker with a sparkling pink sort of strip around it. So I'm going to continue with this, fill in whatever needs to be filled in, keep putting color on until I'm happy and until everything's super flat. And then we're going to start scraping the binding and doing the sides, but that'll be a different episode. So anyway, that's my sanding process and basically my finishing process. The sides will just be clear coats, but I'm going to go through that as well, especially scraping the binding. Although that really doesn't take a lot. I usually scrape at a bevel so that I get the most of the thickness of the binding visible on top without it having to go into the color. So yeah, but anyway, that's a different episode. Also, I'm sorry if I'm stacking these episodes up too much. I just watched Sweet Tea Guitars today. We did a 40-minute video, 40-some minutes video, where he crammed a lot of progress into that video. I chose to do smaller increments and a lot more videos. So if you are adamant in your task to keep track of everybody doing the GGBO, I'm very sorry for my amount of videos. If not, then thank you for watching and thank you for engaging. Like and subscribe and comment if you have comments. If you have constructive feedback, please go ahead. If you have negative feedback, please go ahead. So yeah, that's it for this episode. Thank you for watching.